Ida for not giving my dad back the money he'd put into savings for me when I betrayed him by accepting extra stuff from grandparents who wouldn't give equally to my step-siblings. My parents had always been mindful about securing my future. From the time I was a toddler, they started putting money into a savings account in my name. It wasn't something that was ever discussed in great detail when I was a child, but I knew it existed. My mom would occasionally say things like, "This is for when you are older," or "One day, you will be grateful we did this for you." At the time, those words didn't hold much weight. I was too young to understand what financial security really meant. But looking back now, I realize it was one of the few ways my parents were able to show their love and care in a way that would endure beyond their own lives. When my mom died, I was too young to fully grasp the gravity of what had happened. I was only 7 years old, and the concept of loss felt distant and strange. All I knew was that suddenly, my house felt quieter. There was no longer the sound of my mom's voice humming in the kitchen, no gentle touch on my shoulder when I was upset. My dad, though devastated, tried to stay strong for me. He would sit by my bed at night, reading the same bedtime stories my mom used to read, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the sorrow he carried. He never cried in front of me, but I could hear him sometimes, late at night, when he thought I was asleep. In the months that followed my mom's death, my dad threw himself into keeping things as normal as possible. He kept the house running, kept going to work, and most importantly, he kept contributing to my savings account. It became one of his ways of holding on to her legacy, a promise that, no matter what happened, I would be taken care of. But life has a way of moving forward, even when you don't feel ready. About a year after my mom passed, my dad met Nina. I was 8 years old at the time, and while I don't remember the exact moment she entered our lives, I remember the shift that followed. Suddenly, our house, which had been so quiet and solemn, was filled with new voices, new routines, and new rules. Nina had 2 kids from her previous relationship. Her son, Liam, was 3 years old, and her daughter, Ava, was only 18 months old when they first came into our lives. They were so young, so unaware of the complexities of the world around them. To them, my dad quickly became a father figure, a role he stepped into willingly, perhaps even eagerly. He had always been a nurturing man, and I think part of him saw caring for Nina's kids as a way to fill the void left by my mom's passing. But for me, it wasn't so simple. At 8 years old, I was already wrestling with feelings of grief and confusion. I had lost my mom, the person who had always been my rock, and now I was expected to share my dad with strangers. It wasn't that I disliked Nina or her kids, they were kind enough, and Nina made an effort to be warm and welcoming. But no amount of kindness could change the fact that they weren't my family, not in the way I understood family to be. Despite my mixed feelings, my dad was determined to make this new family dynamic work. He went out of his way to treat Nina's kids like his own. He took them to the park, helped Liam with his homework, and read bedtime stories to Ava. He celebrated their birthdays with the same enthusiasm he showed for mine, and he never once made them feel like they were anything less than his children. It was admirable, in a way, his commitment to fairness and inclusivity. But it also set the stage for tensions that would simmer beneath the surface for years to come. One of the first major changes my dad implemented was a new rule regarding gifts. He decided that any gifts I received from my mom's family had to be matched with gifts for Nina's kids. At first, it seemed like a reasonable request. After all, he didn't want Liam and Ava to feel left out. But as I got older, the rule started to feel more restrictive and, frankly, unfair. For example, when my grandparents wanted to give me a gaming console for my birthday, my dad told them they couldn't do it unless they also got something equivalent for Liam and Ava. My grandparents were frustrated by the rule. "We're not their grandparents," they argued. "We're his family. Why should we have to buy gifts for kids we barely know?" But my dad was firm. "We're a family now," he insisted. "If you want to give something big to him, you need to make sure the other kids aren't left out." Eventually, my mom's side of the family found a workaround. They would keep the bigger gifts at their house, giving me the chance to enjoy them when I visited but without triggering my dad's rule. It wasn't ideal, but it was a compromise that allowed everyone to maintain some level of peace. On the surface, my dad's family followed his rules, too. They made sure to give gifts to all of us equally during birthdays and holidays. But behind closed doors, things were different. My grandparents, my dad's parents, would slip me extra cash when no one was looking. They would buy me smaller gifts and tell me to keep them at their house so my dad wouldn't find out. It was their way of acknowledging that, no matter how hard my dad tried to blend our families, there were still lines that couldn't be erased. As a kid, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I thought of it as a little secret between me and my grandparents, a way to hold on to the sense of specialness I had before Nina and her kids entered the picture. But as I got older, I realized that those secrets were building walls between me and my dad. Walls that neither of us fully acknowledged but both of us felt. By the time I turned 16, my dad decided it was time to have a serious conversation about the savings account. He set me down one evening, a thick envelope of bank statements in his hand. "I want you to know," he began, "that your mom and I started this account for you because we wanted you to have a head start in life. And after your mom passed, I made it my priority to keep adding to it. This money is yours, and I want you to be responsible with it." I remember feeling a mix of emotions: gratitude, pride, and a twinge of guilt. I knew that my dad had sacrificed a lot to keep that account growing. There were times when money was tight, when he had to juggle bills and expenses, but he never stopped putting money aside for me. It was his way of ensuring that, no matter what happened, I would have a safety net. When I turned 18, I gained full access to the account. By then, it was a substantial sum, enough to pay for college, buy a car, or even put a down payment on a house. It was more money than I had ever imagined having at my disposal, and I was determined to use it wisely. But everything changed when my dad discovered the truth about the extra gifts from his parents. It happened in October, during a family gathering. My aunt, who had always been a bit of a troublemaker, let it slip during an argument with my dad. "You think we've treated them unfairly," she snapped. "Well, maybe you should ask your son about the extra gifts and money he's been getting behind your back." The room fell silent. My dad's face darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes. "Is that true?" he asked, turning to me. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "They gave me some extra stuff," I admitted. "But it wasn't a big deal. It didn't change anything." But my dad didn't see it that way. To him, it was a betrayal not just of his rules, but of the family dynamic he had worked so hard to create. "You let your siblings be treated differently," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You accepted gifts behind my back, knowing it would hurt them if they found out. Family is supposed to stand by each other. How could you do that?" I didn't have an answer. At least, not one that he wanted to hear. Although my dad's family publicly followed the rules he set, behind closed doors it was a different story. My grandparents on his side, especially, couldn't fully accept that Nina's kids were now part of their family. It wasn't out of malice or any personal dislike toward them, but they saw me as their grandson, the link to their late daughter-in-law, and someone they wanted to protect and cherish. So, while they made sure to give gifts to all of us equally during family gatherings, they always found ways to slip me extra money or small, thoughtful items when no one else was around. "It's just between us," my grandmother would whisper as she tucked a crisp bill into my hand or handed me a wrapped package. "For you, because you're special to us." I never questioned it. I didn't see it as betrayal or favoritism. To me, it was a reminder that I still had a unique place in their hearts, that despite the blended family dynamic my dad was trying to build, I wasn't being forgotten. I never told my dad about it, not because I thought it was wrong, but because I knew it would cause unnecessary tension. My dad wanted equality, but my grandparents wanted to preserve something that felt exclusive and personal. On my mom's side, things were more straightforward. They didn't care about Nina's kids at all. My maternal grandparents never saw them as part of our family. They weren't cold or dismissive when they saw them, but they made it clear that their relationship with me was unique and separate. Whenever they wanted to give me something big like a gaming console or a new bike, they kept it at their house. "Bring it over when you visit," my grandpa would say. This way, there's no fuss. And so I'd visit them a few times a month, excited to play with the gifts they had for me. It felt like an escape from the carefully curated quality my dad insisted on at home. With my mom's family, I wasn't sharing gifts or time. I was just me, their grandson, receiving their undivided love and attention. As I grew older, I started to notice the differences between how I felt around my two families. At home, I was constantly reminded that we were now a blended family. My dad made it clear that we were supposed to think of each other as equals, as siblings. But I never saw it that way. Liam and Ava weren't my siblings, they were Nina's kids. I was kind to them, of course. I played with them when we were younger, helped Liam with his homework when he struggled, and read bedtime stories to Ava when my dad was busy. But I did those things out of politeness, not out of a deep sense of familial love. I think my dad expected me to naturally embrace them as my siblings. Maybe he thought that over time, the boundaries between us would blur and we'd all become one cohesive family. But that never happened for me. I couldn't force myself to feel something that wasn't there. The bond he hoped would form just never took root. When my dad and Nina got married, I was 12 years old. The ceremony was simple, held in our backyard with close family and friends. I remember standing next to my dad as he exchanged vows with Nina, feeling strangely detached from it all. Everyone around us was smiling, celebrating this new chapter in our lives, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being imposed on me. They were making promises to each other, but no one asked how I felt about it. After the wedding, my dad started referring to Liam and Ava as my little brother and sister. He spoke about us as if we were a united front, the kids, as he'd say. "We need to think about the kids," he'd tell Nina. "What's best for the kids?" And every time he lumped us together like that, I felt a pang of resistance. They weren't my siblings. They were just kids I happened to live with. Still, I never voiced those thoughts out loud. I knew it would hurt my dad, and after everything he'd done to keep our family afloat after my mom died, I didn't want to cause him more pain. So I played along. I smiled when he referred to us as a family. I nodded when he talked about fairness and equality. But in my heart, I kept my distance. My dad never set me down to talk about his expectations regarding our blended family. He never explicitly told me that I was supposed to protect Liam and Ava, or that I should stand up for them in the same way he would. I think he assumed it was something I would naturally do, that I'd feel a sense of duty toward them simply because we lived under the same roof. But that assumption couldn't have been further from the truth. To me, they were just Nina's kids. Nice kids, sure, but not my family. When I turned 16, my dad decided it was time to tell me about the savings account. It was a conversation I'll never forget. We were sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the evening sun casting long shadows across the floor. My dad had a serious expression on his face, the kind he reserved for moments when he needed to impart something important. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he began, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. "It's about your future." I frowned, unsure of where he was going with this. "What about it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It looked worn, as if he'd been carrying it around for a while. He handed it to me, and as I unfolded it, I realized it was a bank statement. "This is your savings account," he explained. "Your mom and I started it when you were little. Every month, we put away a little money for you. After she passed, I made sure to keep adding to it. I wanted to make sure you had something to fall back on when you got older. I stared at the numbers on the page, my eyes widening as I realized just how much money was in that account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a significant amount, more than enough to cover college tuition, buy a car, or even put a down payment on a house. I didn't know, I whispered, still processing the information. I wanted it to be a surprise, my dad said with a small smile. Something your mom and I could give you to help you start your adult life. The mention of my mom brought a lump to my throat. She had been gone for so long, but moments like this made her feel close again, as if she were still looking out for me from beyond the grave. Thank you, I murmured, not knowing what else to say. My dad nodded, his expression softening. You'll have full access to the account when you turn 18. Until then, I want you to think about how you'll use it. This isn't just spending money, it's your future. I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and responsibility settle over me. The savings account wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder of everything my parents had done to secure my future, even through the hardest of times. When I finally gained access to the account at 18, I was overwhelmed by the possibilities it presented. But I also knew that the money came with unspoken expectations. It wasn't just about what I could do for myself, it was about the family dynamics my dad had worked so hard to create. And deep down, I knew that those dynamics were about to be tested in ways none of us could have anticipated. It all came to a head in October. I can still vividly remember the day everything unraveled, the day my dad discovered the truth about the extra gifts from his parents. It wasn't just a family argument. It was a complete unmasking of the cracks in our blended family that had been there all along, hidden beneath a fragile facade of unity. It started during a casual family gathering at my grandparents' house. There wasn't any particular tension in the air at first. Everyone was seated around the table, chatting about everyday things: work, school, upcoming holidays. I was half listening, my mind drifting elsewhere, when I heard my dad and my aunt's voices begin to rise above the hum of conversation. You don't understand, my dad said, his tone sharp with frustration. I expected better from all of you. You should have treated all the kids equally. That's what family is supposed to do. My aunt, never one to back down from a confrontation, crossed her arms and fixed him with a cold stare. And maybe you should ask your precious son why he accepted the extra gifts behind your back if he feels so strongly about fairness. The room went silent. My dad's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he turned to look at me. The weight of my aunt's words hung heavy in the air, like a storm cloud ready to burst. What is she talking about? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, suddenly feeling exposed. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. They gave me some extra stuff, I admitted quietly, my gaze fixed on the table. But it wasn't a big deal. Not a big deal, my dad repeated, his voice rising with each word. You knew I had a rule about treating everyone equally. You knew how important it was to me. And yet you accepted gifts behind my back. I opened my mouth to respond, but my aunt wasn't done stirring the pot. Don't blame me or mom and dad, she said, throwing her hands in the air. He took the stuff willingly. If he really believed in fairness, he wouldn't have accepted it. My dad's face turned red with anger. This isn't about blame. It's about doing what's right. I didn't want my kids growing up feeling like they were treated differently. I didn't want them to carry that hurt. There it was again, that word. Kids. He kept lumping us all together, as if we were one big, happy family. As if I had ever truly seen Liam and Ava as my siblings. The argument escalated from there. My dad confronted my grandparents, demanding to know why they had gone behind his back. They defended their actions, saying they simply wanted to give me a little extra because I was their grandson and they felt I deserved it. We never meant to hurt anyone, my grandmother said softly, tears in her eyes. We just wanted to make sure he knew he was still special to us. But my dad didn't see it that way. To him, it was a betrayal of everything he'd tried to build. After confronting my grandparents, he turned his anger toward me. I could see the hurt in his eyes as he pulled me aside, away from the rest of the family. "I want to hear it from you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you let this happen? How could you let your little siblings be treated differently?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see how deeply this had hurt him, how much he had invested in the idea of our blended family. But I couldn't bring myself to share his perspective. "They're not my siblings," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You accepted them as your full family, but I never did. To me, they've always been Nina's kids." For a moment, my dad just stared at me, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "That's not right," he said, shaking his head. "You've lived with them for years. They've grown up with you. They see you as their big brother." "I was nice to them because they were kids," I replied. "But that's it. I never saw them as my family." The look of disappointment on my dad's face was heartbreaking. "Family is supposed to stand by each other," he said quietly. "Family is supposed to protect each other." I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling defensive. "You keep saying family, but you never asked me how I felt about any of this. You made a decision for all of us without considering that maybe I didn't want a new family. Maybe I was fine with things the way they were." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. "I thought you understood. I thought you cared about them." "I care," I said, my tone softening slightly. "But caring about someone doesn't automatically make them family." I was polite, I helped out, but I never felt the bond you wanted me to feel. "You can't force that." My dad paced the room, his hands on his hips. I could tell he was trying to process everything I was saying, but it wasn't aligning with his own beliefs. "They've looked up to you their whole lives," he said, stopping to face me again. "Ava still talks about how you used to read her bedtime stories. Liam still remembers the time you helped him with his math homework. They don't see you as some stranger. They see you as their brother. And I see them as Nina's kids," I said bluntly. "That's the difference." My dad shook his head again, his expression one of disbelief. "I can't believe this. I thought we were building something real. I thought we were a family." I sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. "We're not the same kind of family you are trying to create. I lost my mom, and no one can replace her. You chose to marry Nina and take on her kids, but that doesn't mean I have to feel the same way." The room fell silent. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the pain in my dad's eyes, the realization that the family he thought he had built was, in my eyes, nothing more than an arrangement of convenience. "Is that why you accepted the extra gifts?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. "Because you never saw them as equals?" I nodded slowly. "Maybe. I don't know. I just know that I didn't think it was wrong at the time. I thought of it as something my grandparents did for me, because I'm their grandson. It wasn't about hurting anyone else. But it did hurt them," he said. "It hurt me. We've spent years trying to create a sense of fairness, and now I find out you've been taking gifts behind my back. Do you know how that makes me feel?" I looked away, guilt creeping in despite my resolve. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," I whispered. I never saw things the way you did." My dad sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease a headache. "This isn't just about the gifts. It's about the way you see our family. I thought we were building something stronger. I thought you understood what it meant to be part of a family." "I do understand," I said. "I understand that family isn't something you can force. It's something you feel. And I'm sorry, but I never felt that connection with them. You did, and that's fine. But I didn't." The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. I knew I had hurt my dad deeply, and part of me wished I could take it back. But I also knew that I couldn't lie to him. I couldn't pretend to feel something I didn't. He took a deep breath, his expression hardening once more. "This isn't over," he said. "We're going to talk about this again. But for now, I need some time to think." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the heavy weight of our fractured family. The confrontation with my dad left a rift between us, one that I wasn't sure could be repaired. For a few days after our argument, the house was eerily quiet. The usual bustle of our blended family was replaced by tense silence. I knew my dad was stewing over everything I had said, over the fact that I had never considered Nina's kids to be my family, over the secret gifts I had accepted, and over the way I had so blatantly shattered the illusion he had worked so hard to build. I thought maybe things would blow over. Maybe he'd cool down after a few days and we'd find some way to move forward, even if things would never be the same again. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, he came to me one evening, his expression hard and unyielding, like a man preparing for battle. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. I sat up straighter, already bracing myself. "About what?" "The savings account," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "I want you to give it back." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "All of it," he said firmly. "Every cent. If you are going to take money and gifts behind my back, if you are going to betray this family, then you don't deserve what your mom and I saved for you." I stared at him in shock. "That money is mine," I said, my voice rising. "You and Mom saved it for me. It was meant to help me start my life." "And you don't think Liam and Ava deserve the same start?" he shot back. "You don't think they deserve to have something to fall back on, just like you?" I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside me. "That's not the point. This money was from my parents. It was meant for me. It's not my responsibility to take care of Nina's kids." "They're your family," he said through gritted teeth. "No, they're not," I snapped. "They're your family. You made that choice." "I didn't." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might yell. But instead, he took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "I thought you were better than this," he said quietly. "I thought you understood what it meant to be part of a family." "I do understand," I said, my voice equally quiet but resolute. "And I understand that family isn't something you can force. I'm grateful for everything you and Mom did for me, but I'm not going to give up the money you saved for me because you're upset about something that happened years ago." My dad shook his head, disappointment etched into his features. "It's not just about the money. It's about the principle. You took from your grandparents, knowing it would hurt your siblings if they found out." "They're not my siblings," I said again. "And I wasn't thinking about them when I accepted those gifts. I was thinking about my relationship with my grandparents, the people who have been there for me my entire life." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly at a loss for what to say. But before he could respond, Nina walked into the room. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us with narrowed eyes. My dad sighed heavily. "I told him to give back the money from his savings account." Nina's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually agree with me. But instead, her expression hardened. "Good," she said, crossing her arms. "It's the least he can do after everything he's taken." I stood up, anger flaring inside me. "I haven't taken anything. That money was saved for me. It's not my fault you didn't have anyone to do the same for your kids." Nina's face twisted with fury. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Do you know how hard your dad has worked to make sure all of you were treated equally? And now you're standing here, acting like you are entitled to more than Liam and Ava." "I'm not acting entitled," I shot back. "I'm protecting what's rightfully mine. This isn't about fairness. It's about you wanting to take something that doesn't belong to you." Nina took a step closer, her voice low and venomous. "You think you are better than my kids, don't you? You think you deserve more because your mom's family had more money. I shook my head, frustrated beyond belief. This isn't about being better or worse. It's about the fact that my mom and dad saved that money for me. Not for you. Not for Liam. Not for Ava. She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. And what about your dad? Do you even care how much this is hurting him? I glanced at my dad, who was standing silently, his expression unreadable. For a moment, guilt flickered in my chest. I hated seeing him like this, torn between the family he had built and the son he had raised. But I couldn't back down. Not now. I care, I said quietly. But I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving up something that was meant for me. Nina looked like she wanted to argue further, but my dad raised a hand to stop her. Enough, he said, his voice tired. This isn't getting us anywhere. Nina glared at me one last time before storming out of the room. My dad watched her go, then turned back to me, his shoulders slumped. I never wanted it to be like this, he said softly. I wanted us to be a family. I sighed, feeling a pang of regret. I know. But you can't force something that isn't there. He nodded slowly, as if finally accepting the truth. I guess we're at an impasse. Yet, I agreed quietly. We are. In the weeks that followed, things remained tense. My dad and Nina kept asking for the money, hoping I'd change my mind. They tried reasoning with me, guilt-tripping me, even appealing to my sense of morality. But I stood firm. The money was mine, and I wasn't going to give it up. Eventually, they stopped asking. I think they realized that no amount of persuasion would change my mind. But the damage had been done. Our relationship would never be the same. Some days, I wonder if I made the right choice. I think about Liam and Ava, and how they might feel if they ever learn the full story. But then I remind myself that I wasn't responsible for the choices my dad made. I didn't ask for a blended family. I didn't ask to be put in a position where I had to choose between my own future and someone else's expectations. In the end, I chose myself. Does that make me an asshole? Maybe. But at least now, I can live with my choices even if it means living with the consequences.